In this lecture, we will code the user listing function of the Shopme admin application. The user listing function allows the admin to see all the users of the Shopme admin application in the tabular format like this, with the columns user ID, photos, email, first name, last name, rows enabled, status, and the action buttons for each user, edit and delete. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to code the HTML table here. Only this table section, without the search and filter, without the pagination, without user photos, because you will learn how to implement the user photos upload in a separate lecture, and how to implement the filter search and pagination in separate lectures. So to implement the user listing function, we need to create the user service class and implement the list all method, create the user controller class and implement the list all method, and create the user HTML page. Come back to the IDE and in the Shopme backend project, create a new class in the package com.shopme.admin.user. Here, create the business class for the user, and the class name is user service. And this is a kind of a business class, so we use the service annotation of the Spring Framework here. And in this user service class, we need to have a reference to the user repository, private user repository repo, and we need to use the auto while annotation to let Spring Framework inject an instant and implementation of the user repository at runtime. And we implement the first method that returns a list of users, list user, list all is a method name. And for now, we simply delegate the call to the repository, import the user entity class, and here we just return repo file method and add cast to list user. Okay. Then create another class for the user controller that will handle requests for the user module. So create a new class here, and its name is user controller. This is a Spring MVC controller class, so we need to use the annotation controller. And in this controller, we need to have a reference of the user service class, private user service and use the annotation to let Spring Framework to inject an instance of the user service class at runtime. And the first handler method is to handle the request to see the user listing page, as you can see in the home page templates index.html. Here in the menu section, we have the hyperlink / users here. This is the URL of the user listing page. So we write the first handler method with the annotation get mapping, because the request will be in HTML get method, and this is the handle URL public string list all. And normally the handler method will return a logical view name, so we will return the logical view name users here. Then Spring MVC will resolve this logical view name into physical view file. So we need to create the user's HTML page under the templates directory here. So we can copy, paste, and modify the index HTML page. Copy and paste here, and change the file name to users.html here. So we use the header, the footer, delete the main content in the body here, delete the section, this is the section for the header, so we keep that section. Let's change the heading of the page here to manage users in heading 2. Okay, now let me start this Shopee backend application. Start. Okay, the application is up and running. And open Chrome browser to access the Shopee backend application. Here, Shopee admin. Click the hyperlink users here, and you can see the heading of the user listing page manage users appears here. Now let's update the code to show the table heading with the column names, user ID, photos, email, first name, last name, rows, and dashboard here. So update the code here. We have another deep section here. Table head and table row. The first column is user ID, and copy paste and modify the code for other columns. The next one is photos. Photos and first name and last name. And enabled status enabled, and before that we have rows of the user, rows, and the last column is for the action buttons, so with the heading is empty. Okay, and refresh. You can see we have the table heading columns here, and we need to use some Bootstrap CSS class for the table, so it will look nice. Class equal table, and with the table head we use a class is table head dark background, and refresh, and you can see the column in the table here. And we use the CSS class table responsive. Somehow it shows the columns in rows. Sorry, I need to delete this code. Keep only GH here. My mistake. And refresh, and you can see the columns of the table appears here. And change the table responsive class here to responsive on extra last screen here, and you can see. And then the table body section, the body, and in the table body we display the user information. So we need to update the controller here to call the method list_all of the user service class that returns the list of user objects from the database. And we need to have access to Spring MVC model object here, model, and here we call service list_all, and it will return a list of users, and we put this list user onto the model. Add attribute here with the name is list users, and object is a list collection, and this list user objects will be available in the view users. Okay, and you can see, and because we are using Spring Boot DevTools, and so each time I save changes for Java code, the application restarted automatically, as you can see here. And in the view page, we can use time-lib syntax GHH to iterate through each element in the collection list users here. Table row GHH with variable name is user in the collection name list users available in the model here. And we, for each user object in the list users collection, we generate a new table row here. And the first table data table shell is for the user ID. So we use the time-lib syntax to print the value of a variable user.id here. Okay, now let's refresh the user listing page here, and you can see the ID 1 here, because in the database we have only one user with ID 1. And write the code for other columns. The next one is for photo. We leave empty now because I will cover user photos upload in a separate lecture. And the next one is for email. Email, first name and last name. First name and last name. Note that the property name here must be the field name in the entity class user. As you can see here, user here, email, first name, last name, photo enabled, rows here. Okay, and the next column is for the rows of the users, rows here. And the last one for the enabled status, and refresh, and you can see first name, sorry, this should be email, first name, last name, row. We are missing the column for email. Refresh, and you can see email, first name, last name, rows, and enabled status. And the last column is the action buttons for each user, like edit and delete last text for now. You can see here. And for the rows of the user, we want to display only the row name, so we can modify the toString method in the in the row class here. Just return the row name here, this name. Okay. And refresh, and you can see the row name of the user Nam Ha Ming is admin here. Now let me run the unit test to create another user with 2 rows in the user repository test here. The test method test create new user with 2 rows here, and run this test method. Okay, succeeded. And refresh here, and you can see we have the second user with ID 3, email Ravi here. first name Ravi, last name Kumar, and this user has 2 roles, editor and assistant here. Perfect, right? And let's add some bootstrap classes in the user's HTML page here to make the table have border and rows, striped rows here, table, border here, and table striped here, and hover and refresh, and you can see the table now has border and striped row here, and hover effect here. You can see when I hover the mouse over a row, its background will be dark, as you can see. And also update the footer to center the copyright notice here. So open the modify the footer here. Use the bootstrap class text dash center here, and refresh, and you can see the text is now centered on the screen. Okay, so far we have done the basic coding for the user listing page that displays the user information in a tabular format like this. And in the upcoming lecture, I will show you how to use Font Awesome library to show the nice icons like this for the enabled status and the action buttons edit and delete